Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another round of monthly internet governance briefing. Obviously, this month we cover what has happened in November, and this will be, in a way, the closing of the briefing year from our side. So let's see during today's briefing on what were the main developments in November when it comes to digital policy, and certainly what's coming in December and January. And believe me, December will still be quite vivid and live when it comes to top-notch meetings and developments. For those of you that might be new to the internet governance briefings, the format is as following. We start with a couple of main trending topics of the previous month with some of the guests from Diplo's expert pool. Then we move on to looking into what are the other developments and what we call the barometer, where the pressure was high in the digital sphere. Then we move into the main events that are coming in the next month, and certainly what Diplo will offer you in the forthcoming period. When it comes to interactivity, the chat is there. I'm happy to also introduce my colleague Ginger, who will be moderating the chat. She'll also be provoking you a little bit. So please feel free, as always, to share your thoughts, ask questions, and reflect on what we discuss. And then Ginger will make sure that we also take it on board in this sort of a plenary setting. So let's start immediately with this time the two key trends of the month. And those two key trends that we decided to look at, or the trending topics, are, of course, Metaverse. We couldn't move away from discussions about Metaverse and what's coming. And the other one, well, again, the antitrust. We have tried to skip it for some time, but it's just impossible. So we'll have to look again at some of digital developments when it comes to antitrust. But let's dive straight into the topic of Metaverse now. There were a lot of discussions about Metaverse, and this has probably been pushed by large by the Facebook's change of the name and their focus on Metaverse, the announcement, but it is certainly not a new thing. What is Metaverse? Well, in brief, we tried to explain it through Diplo's work on the Digital Watch, and also a video that you can watch on Diplo's pages. But if you can think of a social network, whatever you take, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or whatever, where you can actually browse through content and meet your friends with a bit of chat and sharing images and all that in 2 dimensions, what will change with Metaverse will be the 3 dimensions space, where you can put your glasses, walk through the 3-dimensional space, and at some point in future, even touch the people around you, maybe feel the smells, and literally move yourself from the environment that we know to a completely imagined and creative environment that we can create on our own. Now, we're not going to take much time on explaining what the Metaverse will bring, but we want to reflect on sort of a buzz around it that emerged in the recent days and weeks, where we have more and more companies coming front and saying they are developing Metaverse spaces or Metaverse options. And there are also some states which are trying, and even cities which are trying to find their place in Metaverse, one or more Metaverses, and a lot of policy and policy implications generally and trends when it comes to Metaverse. So I'll cut it short now, and I want to bring in Stephanie. So Stephanie is someone who's been trying to cover what has happened in this buzz about Metaverse in the last weeks. Stephanie, welcome. And I guess it was not easy when you were trying to put everything up in the newsletter as well, to connect all the dots of what's happening. So maybe really, what are the main trends and what are some of the key policy implications? Stephanie.
Thank you, Vlado, for the introduction, and hello, everyone. Great to be here. Indeed, Vlada, in November, I would say that the Metaverse was probably the most, let's say, topical issue of the month. there is so much, let's say, buzz around it, and so many developments from the companies developing new technology to announcements, as you were saying, from countries trying to establish their presence in the metaverse. So it's really a race at the moment. And there's also a lot of awareness among users, among consumers, among us, really, about what the metaverse is. In fact, we've taken a look at the trends, at the Google trends related to the searches that people have been making in the past month, and the metaverse is really high up there. We'll cover that in the newsletter, but for now, let me just summarize the, let's say, 5 main aspects related to the metaverse that we've identified in November. And the first, I would say, is almost the lack of a definition of what the metaverse is. And this is because the companies, so the private industry, is developing its own versions of what it sees as the metaverse. So there is no one single definition of the metaverse. Actually, it's still a question mark whether the metaverse will be a singular space or whether there will be parallel metaverses. There are questions about whether this will all be sort of fragmented, if there is no one space where everyone is there. So we don't really know how this will evolve. We have hints, but it is so diverse that it is very difficult at the moment to really be able to say what the metaverse actually is. To add to this is the fact that there are some claim that the metaverse exists already, and some others claim that it doesn't exist yet. So this compounds to the issue that we're seeing, that we still don't really know or have common understanding of what the metaverse is. But we do have a rough idea. It's this immersive experience where you have the gadget, the binoculars, I call them, because that's what they look like, the glasses, the virtual reality glasses, and very soon the haptic gloves. So the technology is moving really forward and fast. So that's the first sort of trend that we're seeing. A second trend is the race that is ensuing at the moment, and especially between, let's say, 2 main companies. So we have Meta, or formerly known as Facebook, which is what a lot of people still call it. So we have Meta on one hand, US Meta, and Tencent, China's Tencent. So those, I would say, are the 2 companies at the forefront. So they're leading the race. And again, we're seeing US versus China. So who gets there first, who develops the metaverse first, and who makes who will make money the most, and who will get the largest market share. So there's a race going on there. The third, let's say, trend is that the concerns related to the metaverse are mounting. So we can put it in this way. On the internet, we know of the concerns that exist: misinformation, security, child safety online, etc. Those issues, now we're also discussing them in the sense that whether we will also see those issues in the metaverse. So those concerns, let's say, are being transferred into the metaverse. An increase in concerns even related to IPR, so intellectual property, so a lot of legal question marks there. So the concerns are basically mounting. A fourth trend, and I referred to a little bit earlier, is the fact that technology is developing and is adapting very fast. And the latest that we've observed is the production of haptic gloves. So this is the gloves which enable you to feel what is virtually in the metaverse. Now think, when we're saying haptic gloves, think we know what haptic is. If you take your mobiles, when they vibrate, that is the haptic feedback of the mobile. So the gloves would mimic that movement, but it would also mimic the sense of touch. And that brings our senses, one of our five senses, closer to reality. So the immersion is even deeper there. And the fifth trend is that users want to make money, and linking it back to the search that a lot of people are doing on search engines regarding the metaverse. An interesting search query that people are making is related to cryptocurrencies and NFTs, non-fungible tokens, on the metaverse. And I don't know, Vlada, whether we have Arvin who can say a few words about that. But at this stage, those are, I would say, the top 5 highlights related to the metaverse. So Vlada, over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think there was a good showcase of where things are going. And there are a couple of things that you mentioned clearly. One is related to whether how it's going to look like, and I think the way you put it, that it's going to engage more of our different senses. That it's not going to be just a visual sense and audio sense, but also probably the haptic and maybe the feeling of movement and all of that. That's what's coming. Now the important thing is that the metaverse as such is not one technology. It's actually composed of a number of technologies, including neural technologies and visual technologies, and all that develops with its own pace and has different usages, but put together actually can create this real feeling that we immerse completely with all our senses into an imagined world. The other thing that is important is one of the concerns that emerged after Meta was that if Facebook would be the one who would be actually driving this metaverse, can we trust it? And what are the policy implications and fears that people have because of Facebook and all that happened in the past, and generally social media? Can we trust then the new metaverse and more complex space? Now, what we've heard from Stephanie is that we see more and more different industries. So it's not just Facebook, it's also Microsoft, it's also gaming industry that are trying to launch their own types of metaverse, and we'll see whether that will actually come together at some places, Stephanie said. Now, Stephanie, I want to get back with you with one question. There was a lot of discussions, and I was also invited by a number of journalists to reflect on what this will bring, what are the consequences for our regular life, but also political and diplomatic consequences and opportunities. And one of the breaking news was we now have the embassy of Barbados announces the first embassy in Metaverse. It is sort of first, and it's not. So how do you see, first maybe a reflection to this embassy in Metaverse and diplomacy for the future? How can we see the Metaverse can shape our relations and political processes in the future?
Sure. And here you mentioned Barbados, which is an excellent example of a country just wanting to get there when it comes to the diplomatic process, wanting to get to this new space as quickly as possible. So that tells us something already about diplomacy and the governance process. It reminds me also about what Diplo had worked on in Second Life, which is, let's say, it was a metaverse in its embryonic phase. I don't know if that is a good way to explain it, but for those who don't know what Second Life it was this virtual space where you had the avatars there and the virtual, let's say, spaces, buildings, etc. So there were even embassies at the time. So that is, let's say, we can say that the beginnings of the metaverse, we can trace them back to Second Life and to other spaces. It wasn't the same, granted, because the immersive experience wasn't the same. I mean, now we have the glasses, soon the gloves. So it's to me, the metaverse speaks to me as an immersive space, one in which the senses are closer to reality. But in terms of the processes there, the fact that there are governments which in one way or another are already eyeing this metaverse, that tells me that let's say the policy process is being developed in a more mature way. We have to keep in mind that we know we do have already experience of what these issues could be, and that's because of the experience that the internet gave us. So the way that policymakers will be approaching the metaverse is in a more mature way. When it comes to content, we know how, for instance, unwanted content spreads very quickly. We know ways in which it can be tackled. We know who should tackle, or roughly we have an idea, but let's say the markers are there. So in terms of the policymaking process, there will already be a certain level of maturity. Also, the metaverse is a place where diplomacy can unfold. I mean, it's still early days, granted. Barbados and there was also Seoul, South Korea, claiming the title of the first major city to enter the metaverse. It's still early days, but this maturity in the way that we approach policy, I think it will mark the policymaking aspect related to the metaverse even more than it did many years ago when the internet was born.
Thanks, Stefan. This is a good reminder, again, that metaverse is not a new concept. It was in maybe two-dimension projection of the three-dimension space on the screen. And back then, we also had states, as Stephanie said. There were two embassies in Second Life. One was of the Maldives, which actually Diplo set up. I think it was actually the first embassy in Second Life, and then Sweden and others. So there is this interest of states for a long time already in evolving diplomacy as well and international relations. Let's stay tuned to that. And there is another element which Stephanie mentioned, which is new, and that's the NFTs. But before I move on to the NFTs, I just want to remind you that you have a chat. And I do invite you to raise questions, comments, reflections. We'll get back to Ginger immediately after the brief intervention on NFTs. Now, if we understand that in the digital space, be it a metaverse or Facebook or whatever we have now, the products, the assets there are digital. They're actually a piece of code. And we always call for sharing of digital assets and knowledge and all of that. The concept of ownership, and even if you want the transactions of the items which can be multiplied and copied, was always an issue. That's where at some point blockchain and cryptocurrencies came as a way to handle the transaction from me to you when it comes to money. Now we have a question of the ownership and transactions of other objects which are actually digital, and that's where the NFTs come to. But I want to pass the floor to Arvin, our experts, Diplo's experts on blockchain, cryptocurrencies, and NFTs, definitely. Arvin, I know it's not an easy task. Can you try to explain in plain words what the NFTs actually stand for? How does it work? And how do you see the perspective of NFTs in these new worlds, including metaverse? Arvin.
Thanks, Vlada. Yes, sure. And as you mentioned, the idea is really can get back, trace back to, let's say, the origin of the internet. The first idea to have a space inside the space which will be independent of others. So that's why this idea was actually developed mostly in open source communities, cryptographic communities, just like email lists such as cyberpunk and etc. So those kind of a subculture involved into cryptographic cryptocurrencies and crypto proof of concept. But pulling this idea of independent digital world in which we can own something which is not tangible, actually it's on a different level than tangible assets like house, cars, etc. And it's not coincidence that which Stephanie mentioned, that most of the terms related when you type search around meta and metaverses and things like that actually evolve around the tokens and NFTs, as you mentioned, and you perfectly clearly stated that NFTs are basically just a unique digital object. Why were they were first explored in a ways of metaverse? Most popular one is the Decentraland, which will basically kind of introduce the blockchain solution for the metaverse with like collectibles from games, etc. Also, this is a big part of the gaming community, which has now already like developed business industry around tokens, which are not fungible, actually kind of unique, and they can be kind of used throughout the gaming and throughout the goes to this metaverse or alternative spaces into the internet. The main difference between metaverse we just kind of explained earlier is, of course, the proprietary nature of that metaverse. The main difference is that blockchain and tokens kind of industry is created in an open source standards which are already implemented on the internet. Everyone can access it. We had a question here, like, how can least developed countries maybe can access it? There are kind of a battle between the proprietary versions of metaverse and Microsoft being the biggest one, or Facebook, and the big movement which calls themselves Web3 creators, Web 3.0 creators, who are developing this kind of a new worlds on open source platforms, transparent, immutable, etc. So, Vlado, back to you.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, I mean, it already seems complex when you combine this, the metaverse, the new space, and then the new approach to ownership and ownership of digital objects and the tokens and all of that. I have a quick question back to you, Arvin. There was a lot of transactions recently which involved a huge amounts of money. And most recently, I think Paris Hilton actually had an AI whatever object and so on. So there is also a lot of money. And on the other hand, there seems to be some use for promoting the art and protecting the artists and the creators as well. So how do you see what are maybe the main usage currently?
Of course, you mentioned rightly that protection of you said earlier in the briefing that it's really easy to copy digital data, and we know this in a digital era. You can't block digital data from being copied, shared, etc. But you maybe can regain the ownership over it. So basically, even if it's like a 10 iteration or copy, you can still know who created it, how is it created, when, and who this belongs. In this, to be honest, the main driver of the current NFT craze and art craze is our relation to the digital art and online presence, to be honest, because now the online things became more important for our cloud, let's say, or our, whatever we want to see ourselves, than the in situ stuff. So we would rather have a unique, game item or 10,000 likes on our Instagram post rather than having some meaning. It's more important to us. So this shift is in art, gaming industry, and of course, all forms collectibles. Now in digital age, collectors will get digital copies of their hobbies. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I think this describes, and we'll definitely have to continue with this discussion and trying to connect all the dots of these new emerging technologies. We took some time, but I think it was useful. Now, Ginger, I want to get back to you and see what's happening in chat. I understand there were quite some backs and forths and interesting comments and questions, so maybe you can reflect and summarize what was in the chat. Ginger.
Thank you, Vlada, and thank you to everyone who's joined us. It's great to see your faces and your comments. We have quite a range of reactions, and it reflects the range of topics, right from whether access, if you don't even have access to the internet, all the way to Arvin talking about millions and millions being spent on non-fungible tokens. It's a very, very wide range, and that, of course, is going to exacerbate the problem of divides between people who have access and don't have access. There's also been a question of how many of us are already in the metaverse. Philippa brought that up together with how we define it. And that is very interesting, I think, because it was asked earlier, are we already in the universe? Do we have to know it's the metaverse to be in the metaverse? What establishes the fact that it exists, just that it has a name now? So there have been different aspects discussed here, both in the metaphysical metaverse and the actual physical metaverse, as Ying Chu has brought up several important points about how this will affect involvement and engagement and increase the divides we're already facing as least developed countries have less access and less abilities to catch up with the world. It's impossible to bring it all in without taking time to repeat the whole session, but I just have an interesting thought with Arvin, because going back to my first experience with the metaverse, maybe, because I don't do Minecraft or games, which, as Arvin and Ying Chu pointed out, are part of the metaverse. Universities, in Ying Chu's experience, are using Minecraft to actually build virtual campuses, much like we did in Second Life. But Arvin, to the point, my question is, when you made us T-shirts for DiploFoundation back in Second Life, were those our first non-fungible tokens?
That's yeah. Go, Arvin.
No. I mean, yeah, those are not digital objects. So NFTs are almost always referred to a digital object rather than a first, but it might be an imprint or a copy of an NFT, or let's say right mouse button, save as, and then like a copy.
And I can remember back in the days in the Second Life when we also had a sort of graduation ceremonies on our courses in the Second Life. We played with that. And by default, you get, as an avatar, you get the shorts and T-shirt. And then we had to buy the suit in Second Life, which actually costed, I think, $1 or something. So I guess there was the experience. And back to your comment, Ginger, of a definition of how we understand it, whether a metaverse was for those of us that maybe started with website and emails first, whether that was already a sort of a metaverse where we transformed ourselves to a different world, towards Minecraft that you mentioned, and the number of kids today which play that world, which connect with their friends, enjoy in that existing world, even if they don't have the full, as Steph said, haptic feeling and three-dimensional view around yet. But is that the metaverse or something next that's coming? Ginger, any final thoughts from the chat on this topic, or should we move on?
That's about it. Just to throw this out, Philippa just commented on the relationship between Meta and Metaverse and Zuckerberg's influence on the Metaverse. And that is an important point, along with our definitions and how we define that, as you and Stephanie already have brought up. I have a particular concern about Philippa's question because I attended a lecture last week where Mark Zuckerberg was referred to as the king of the metaverse. And I find that quite disturbing. I think that would be a very narrow version, but Philippa, thank you for bringing that in, and that's food for thought for the future.
Thanks, Ginger. Well, one thing I would probably have to promise at this point is that we will have to organize at least one, if not a set of events to explore this future more. So stay tuned with that. We have to move on. But we are actually moving on to the second trending topic of this month, which is very related to how we concluded the first one. And it goes into antitrust. So if we mention that Facebook and maybe other big giants are stepping now into a new field, should we firstly see what's actually happening in the old field, or Internet 2.0 that we currently have? So I'm bringing back Stephanie. And Stephanie, I know that for months we've been trying to avoid getting back into this topic because it's always on the agenda, but it seems like it's unavoidable. So what's new when it comes to the antitrust issues, and why it's a buzzword again this month?
Thank you, Vlada. Well, it's, as you're saying, it's a lot of new, let's say, cases or decisions about a very old topic. And what we're saying is more of the same. It's basically more fines, hefty fines, although one might say that they are, even the heftiest of fines are probably dwarfed by the enormous amounts of revenues that the big tech generate. But anyway, so one of the main cases was in the EU. So the EU's General Court, it confirmed an old sentence against Google. We call it the shopping service case. And the issue was that Google was found that it favored its own comparison shopping service across a lot of countries from Europe. So it confirmed the big fine, which is 2.7 billion euros. And when you compare that to the revenue for Google for 2021 for this year, it is a little slice from the whole, let's say, deck of profits that the company made this year. But anyway, decision there was also a decision from Italy, hefty fines, not as big as this one from the EU, but essentially, let's say, a conclusion that we can draw out of these two cases is the fact that in Europe, and especially the EU, it reconfirms the EU's intention of trying to rein in the big tech through fines. So that's in a nutshell what has been happening on antitrust. You're right, Vlada. We try to stay away from saying, cases again, antitrust cases, new ones, judgments have been issued, etc. But this is the reality. This whole, let's say, atmosphere or this whole goal that the policymakers have in trying to rein in the big tech. So back to you, Vlado.
Thanks, Steph. A quick reaction or a question back to you. And I know it's hard to respond, but because you've been following this topic for quite a long period, do you have an impression that these fines are actually changing the behavior of the big tech at least a little bit? Or we'll just keep seeing fines and all of that, and this will be the news in future?
A good question, Vlad. So basically, what's the point of all these fees? First of all, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, they're not fees that will really make a big impact in the bottom lines of the companies, because the revenues are so large. By comparison, penalties are quite small in comparison. Penalties themselves I don't think that they are enough of a, let's say, of a push for the companies to make any changes to their practices. So not define themselves. But we saw something in November that will initiate a change, at least in one of the business models, in one of the company's business models, and that's Apple. In what we observed in November is the fact that there was a continuation of the case between Epic Games and Apple. It's a long case that's been ongoing. There was a judgment in September which ruled that the practices of Apple weren't necessarily anti-competitive. They weren't proven to be anti-competitive, but the court said something which was quite important and which is going to affect the way Apple does things. And this is the following. The court ruled that Apple must change its so-called anti-steering rule. And this is so Apple should now allow developers to link users to alternative in-app purchases, because so far Apple did not allow that. So developers had to use the inbuilt system, and Apple used to charge between 15 to 30% on the sales from developers. Now that is going to change. First of all, there was this ruling, but second of all, Apple, it did ask the court to stay the injunction, and the court in November denied this request. So it basically told Apple, hey, from I think it's 9 December, which is 3 months, 90 days from the court judgment, it basically told Apple, hey, you need to change the way you run the App Store. And this goes right to the heart of the Apple's business model. So fines, in summary, fines may not be changing the behavior, but court decisions and laws, they will force companies to change parts of the way they run things.
Thanks, Steph. If nothing, then the fines are changing the awareness and our understanding, and then put probably more of the pressure on other institutions. So we'll have to stay tuned and see how that goes. Before moving to the barometer, Ginger, were there any follow-up discussions either on antitrust or the link between antitrust and metaverse and the other? Ginger.
In an interesting way, there is. Philippa and Ying Chu have both commented. Philippa has brought up that we need to deal also with the challenges that we're creating and not facing in the real world. And that brings up the point of, is the metaverse part of the real world? Is there a crossover? Are we going to repeat the same problems? What is the metaverse then? Is it an overlap? Is there an overlap? How do those problems get solved? And are we simply going to create two areas of similar problems? So I guess that's a bit of discussion that for the future, and we will think of. And Ying Chu then has in contrast, a very positive comment on non-fungible tokens, because this system makes intellectual properties more valuable in that they can now circulate. They have a way to be part of the digital market, not just the auction market. So those are the main points, and bring in that crossover between real and offline. And is there a change, or is it one and the same?
Thanks, Ginger. Yeah, on the second comment, I guess we should also remember that the NFTs can and will go together with smart contracts and the code, and imposing some parts of the contract through the algorithm. So it will really be a game changer, and could be very positive, but also will certainly have challenges. And I think we can close with your first comment or question from the chat, which is to what extent the existing fight for the right type of governance and models, including antitrust, will influence how the metaverse will develop, or we will actually end up with having two or more different streams of dealing with different technologies. I'll stop there and we'll end up with the trends. We have taken quite some time, but I think it was interesting. Moving on to the barometer and what has happened besides this in the last month. And I invite my colleague Andreana to join me and take over from here. Andreana, welcome. And you can take us through the barometer and where the pressure was high and low. Over to you.
Thank you for the floor, Vlado. This month we had three topics that we considered to be, let's say that the pressure was high, but I'll break from tradition just for a minute to say that global IG architecture was neutral this month, but we do expect it to be high next month because of the developments that we are expecting in December. So the IGF leadership panel, which was announced, the 2020 edition of the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum, and the Summit for Democracy, which the USA will be organizing. Let us now go through the topics that were high this month. Sustainable development was high because all eyes were on Glasgow, where the UN climate change conference was held. It emphasized in its final proceedings that there is a need for digital collaboration to help promote net zero. E-commerce and the internet economy were predictably high, as explained with the antitrust cases, but there's also an important update on gig work. Bolt will be testing a feature which will allow their drivers to set their own prices. And this is something that it's an interesting experiment, but we'll also see if other companies will follow suit. And of course, new technologies were high on the agenda because of all of the developments around the metaverse, and there were important developments on facial recognition technologies. Facebook decided to drop the facial recognition feature, but before we rush to call it a win for privacy, there is a caveat. They will drop the feature, but on Facebook and Instagram. And the Meta spokesperson said that the company's new commitment does not apply to its metaverse products. And an interesting update is about Clearview AI, which we've spoken about many times. They have been refusing for a long time to submit their software for voluntary review to NIST. However, they did do so, and its software was ranked as one of the most accurate facial recognition softwares in the top 5. And this is particularly interesting because the company and its software were under fire in the past for false identification. And still on the topic of artificial intelligence, UNESCO member states adopted the first ever global framework for ensuring that AI-driven digital transformation promotes human rights and contributes to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, bringing it back to our Sustainable Development topic that was high-pressured. And now we will move to the future. So what are we looking forward to in December and January? For the upcoming events, it might be the end of the year, but it's not the end of our attendance of events. If you're surprised not to see the WTO ministerial conference behind me, don't be. It was postponed on Friday. It was supposed to start today and end on the 3rd, supposed to be in Geneva. It's postponed indefinitely. We will certainly keep an eye on that and let you know what the new dates are. Of course, you are probably not surprised that the IGF is in December. You've probably already have marked it on your calendars. It's the biggest internet governance gathering in the world. And this year, it will be a fully hybrid meeting. So you're either attending online or on site, but if you're attending online, the IGF has made sure that this will be very inclusive. So there will be use of digital tools, a 3D venue, a mobile app, and opportunities for hybrid feedback. There are over 250 sessions on the schedule, and GIP will be reporting from most of them. So if you're interested in attending parallel sessions, we will help you out there. Go to your session and read our report later. You can read it on our website, of course, on the Digital Watch Observatory, but we also have a reporting app developed 2 years ago that you can download for free on your mobile phone. Also in December, also under the auspices of the UN, we have the CCW 6th Review Conference. The conference represents an opportunity for the high contracting parties to strengthen the implementation of the convention. And this year, because the conference is reviewed from time to time, I think every 5 years, yes, every 5 years, the parties will discuss lethal autonomous weapons systems, and in particular, the report of the group of governmental experts that debates lethal autonomous weapon systems. On that very same week, the open-ended working group on ICT development will be running its first substantive session. This is the second time this year the group is meeting. The first time they did it for an organizational session in May. And this time they will really go into their remit, and they will speak about their 6 topics on the agenda. But also expected is that the group will discuss how the OEWG will become an action-oriented process. We've spoken about the interplay between the OEWG, the GGE, and the program of action before. And this is probably a concession to the tendencies of states to have an action-oriented process. This will be interesting to follow because the program of action is not elaborated yet, and an elaboration is supposed to come in spring. So we'll see if the OEWG becomes action-oriented, how that will interplay with the program of action. And next year, but not that far as it might seem, is the Cybercrime Ad Hoc Committee first session. A lot of things happening at the UN. This committee is composed of experts and representatives of all regions, and it's mandated to draft a new cybercrime convention. At this first meeting, the member states are expected to share their views on the scope, objectives, and elements of the draft convention, which is to be published in the next few years. We will also be following all these proceedings very carefully. You will be able to see reports from probably all of them on our Digital Watch Observatory. If we have missed any important events, please feel free to suggest your candidates in the chat by using #event, and Ginger will be able to pick up on them. We promise we will add them to the calendar on Digital Watch Observatory. If you want to see our calendar, which is very comprehensive, you can visit dig.watch/events. And still looking into the future, my colleague Teresa will now take over to tell us what Diplo and the GIP have planned. So from Geneva, with love, over to Teresa.
Thank you very much, Adriana. And certainly this will be from the Geneva Internet Platform and Diplo with love. And also for us, December doesn't stop us. So let me quickly run through a few events that we have prepared for you. So on the 1st of December already, we will be dealing with a topic that has been very close to our hearts, and that's the topic of capacity building. In this particular event setup, it will be devoted to capacity building in e-commerce negotiations. Obviously, this was planned carefully also to coincide with the WTO ministerial, which is now not taking place, but that means that probably more time is available for preparation. So join us there. You might also be aware that one format of events that we are organizing are so-called web debates, when we try to kind of touch upon the less mainstream areas of diplomacy. And each month is on a different topic, often quite exciting ones. And again, it shouldn't come as a surprise that we will be hanging on to the climate change negotiations after last month. And we will be bringing you more on the perspectives from developing countries. Quite an anticipated event that I would really like to draw your attention to will be on the 14th of December. One topic that certainly is moving and causing some questions and emotions also is the role of China in the area of digital standards and its role in the ITU. So we try to get to the bottom, and my colleague Sorina Teleanu has made a very, very comprehensive research. We have a report of 100 pages actually that will be launched at this very event, really looking into this issue quite in depth. So please register and make sure to download the report after 14th of December. Just the day after, we are continuing in a series of events in the series that we entitled From Geneva, Reflections on Digital Future, that the Geneva Internet Platform co-organizes with the permanent missions of Slovenia, Switzerland, and the EU delegation in Geneva. And this last event in the series will be dedicated to the issue of tech for development. Just the day after, we will be kind of having a little tour of the richness of Geneva actors active in the field of development. So every month we dedicate to one issue. We had an event dedicated to security just earlier this week, and on 16th of December it will be development. And last but not least, just to prepare you a little Christmas present, we will have one of our historical journeys, this time dedicated to, again, diplomacy and technology. You can always find more details at the link that is available at the bottom of this slide, but I do encourage you to subscribe to our newsletters, not to miss anything. Now, in addition to this, we also provide quite a few training opportunities, and new courses will be coming up early next year. Do browse through Diplo website to find out more, but there is one, well, more than a course that I would like to point out, and that's our master's degree in contemporary diplomacy, where you can specialize on digital policy and internet governance. This is a fully accredited master's degree that we conduct together with the University of Malta. And why I'm mentioning it kind of more explicitly as the deadline is quite soon, in 2 weeks. So if you're considering of conveniently studying for your master's mostly online, do make sure to check it out. And just a few more words on the resources. You know that we always produce a newsletter, which kind of summarizes the previous month and gives outlook to the month ahead, similar to the format of this briefing, but in a written format. So stay tuned, because this should really be available imminently. On the 16th, we will be issuing another bit shorter newsletter on cyber detente, kind of a trend that we are watching. We have been working on this newsletter since the Biden-Putin summit in Geneva, and we are really trying to keep track on what has changed. Has there been any cyber detente, any kind of improvement in relations in the cyber sphere? And besides the monthly newsletter, we have a bit more dynamic resource that I encourage you to consult, and that is that every Friday night we publish a little summary of the main issues and main trends in that given week. Again, just subscribe to our newsletters. It will come to your mailbox and you can read it over the weekend or on Monday after. That would be it for me. Over to you, Adriana, Vlada.
Thank you for that overview, Teresa.
And that was it when it comes to the briefings of 2021. We have to remember which year it is, and if this was not the metaverse, traveling from Belgrade to Geneva to Malta and all the places where you are, I don't know what it is. Final reminders, as we said, the newsletter is coming out, the master's program is still open for applications, and before we meet you, which will be the last Tuesday of January next year. That will be the next briefing Tuesday, 25th of January. I'm happy to congratulate the birthday to my colleagues. So we'll move on eating some cake and celebrating the birthday. And I wish you everything best until the end of this year. See you back in January. Thank you and bye-bye.
See you in January. Happy holidays.